The explosion shattered the morning silence across Red Square at exactly 7:47 a.m. Moscow time. What started as a routine security sweep by FSB operatives turned into the most audacious attack on Russian sovereignty in decades. The drone, no larger than a briefcase, had somehow penetrated the most heavily defended airspace in the world and detonated just meters from Lenin's mausoleum. Colonel Viktor Petrov was drinking his third cup of black coffee in the FSB command center when the alarms began screaming. The massive wall of monitors flickered to life, showing real-time feeds from dozens of security cameras positioned around the Kremlin complex. Smoke billowed from the iconic cobblestones of Red Square as emergency vehicles raced toward the scene. "Sir, we have a code black situation," announced Lieutenant Anya Volkov, her voice cutting through the chaos of the operations room. Unidentified aerial device detonated in Red Square. No casualties reported, but the symbolic impact. Petrov slammed his coffee cup down, the hot liquid splashing across classified documents. In his 23 years with the FSB, he had never seen anything like this. The very heart of Russian power had been violated, and someone was going to pay dearly for this humiliation. "Lock down the entire district," Petrov barked into his radio. "I want every street camera analyzed, every phone call monitored, and every person within a 5-kilometer radius questioned. This is not some amateur operation." But that was only the beginning of what would become the most dangerous week in modern Russian history. Within hours, international news networks were broadcasting footage of the attack around the globe. The images were devastating for Russia's carefully constructed image of invincibility. Foreign diplomats whispered in embassy corridors about Russian weakness, while opposition groups celebrated what they saw as a crack in Putin's armor. In the Kremlin's crisis management room, President Vladimir Putin sat at the head of a polished oak table, his expression darker than anyone had seen in years. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu shuffled through intelligence reports, while FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov tried to explain how their most sophisticated air defense systems had failed so spectacularly. "Gentlemen," Putin's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Someone has made a very serious mistake. Find them. Find them quickly." The investigation led Petrov down a rabbit hole of encrypted communications and ghost networks that seemed to vanish the moment his cyber specialists tried to trace them. Every lead dissolved into digital smoke, as if their unknown adversary was always one step ahead of Russia's most advanced surveillance capabilities. No one expected what came next. 3 days after the Red Square incident, a second drone appeared over the Bolshoi Theater during a performance attended by several high-ranking government officials. This time, however, the device didn't explode. Instead, it projected a holographic message in perfect Russian across the theater's ceiling: "Your secrets are not safe. Your power is not absolute. The truth will be revealed." The audience erupted in panic as security forces stormed the building, but the drone had already vanished into the Moscow night. More disturbing than the message itself was the fact that it had been broadcast live on social media before authorities could shut down the feeds. Petrov realized they were dealing with something far more sophisticated than a terrorist attack. This was psychological warfare conducted by someone with intimate knowledge of Russian security protocols and an apparently unlimited budget for cutting-edge technology. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dmitry Kozlov, a low-level technician at a military radar facility outside Moscow, contacted Petrov's team with information that would change everything. Kozlov had been analyzing radar data from the morning of the Red Square attack when he noticed something that the automated systems had missed. The signature doesn't match any known aircraft, Kozlov explained nervously as he sat across from Petrov in a secure briefing room. But more importantly, the flight path originated from inside Russian airspace. This wasn't an infiltration from outside our borders. Petrov felt his blood turn cold. If Kozlov was correct, it meant the attack had been launched from within Russia itself, possibly by someone with access to military installations. The investigation took on new urgency as Petrov's team began examining internal security footage from dozens of military bases and research facilities. They were looking for any sign of unauthorized drone activity or suspicious personnel behavior in the weeks leading up to the attack. Meanwhile, the political pressure from the Kremlin intensified daily. Putin demanded answers, and his patience was wearing dangerously thin. Heads were already beginning to roll in the intelligence community, with several high-ranking officials quietly reassigned to remote postings in Siberia. The third incident occurred exactly 1 week after the Red Square bombing. This time, the target was the Moscow metro during rush hour. Passengers on Line 1 suddenly found their train cars filled with holographic projections showing classified documents that detailed corruption within the highest levels of Russian government. The documents were authentic, verified by multiple sources within the FSB itself. They revealed kickback schemes involving billions of rubles, secret foreign bank accounts held by government ministers, and arms dealing arrangements that violated international treaties. But the most shocking revelation was a series of intercepted communications between President Putin and several oligarchs discussing plans to eliminate political opponents through targeted assassinations disguised as accidents or natural deaths. The leak sent shockwaves through Moscow's political establishment. Several oligarchs immediately fled the country, while others began distancing themselves from the Kremlin. International sanctions were discussed in emergency sessions at the UN, and Russia's already fragile economy began showing signs of severe strain. Petrov knew that finding the source of these attacks had become a matter of national survival. The systematic exposure of state secrets was threatening to bring down the entire government structure that had maintained power for over 2 decades. The investigation took a dramatic turn when facial recognition software identified a person of interest captured on security footage near all 3 incident locations. The individual was Dr. Elena Marchenko, a former military engineer who had worked on classified drone technology before being dismissed from service 3 years earlier. According to her personnel file, Marchenko had been terminated for raising concerns about the military applications of her research and suspected misuse of technology for domestic surveillance. Her security clearance had been revoked, and she had been blacklisted from government employment. But Marchenko had disappeared completely after her dismissal. No employment records, no social media presence, no financial transactions. It was as if she had become a ghost, which made her the perfect suspect for orchestrating ghost-like attacks against the state. Petrov assembled a special task force to track down Marchenko, using every resource at the FSB's disposal. They traced her through a network of safe houses and underground contacts that revealed a sophisticated support network of disillusioned former government employees and military personnel. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Marchenko hadn't been working alone. She was part of a larger organization that included former Spetsnaz operators, dismissed intelligence officers, and brilliant technicians who had been pushed out of the system for various reasons. This shadow network had been planning their campaign against the Russian government for years, carefully positioning assets and developing advanced technology while remaining completely invisible to state security services. The fourth attack came without warning and targeted the most sensitive location possible, the Kremlin itself. During a routine cabinet meeting, holographic projections suddenly appeared throughout the conference room, displaying real-time conversations between Putin and foreign intelligence services. The recordings revealed secret agreements with hostile nations, plans to manipulate elections in allied countries, and most damaging of all, Putin's private acknowledgement that several high-profile terrorist attacks blamed on foreign enemies had actually been false flag operations conducted by Russian forces. The cabinet meeting dissolved into chaos as ministers demanded explanations and began questioning their own loyalty to a leader who had apparently been deceiving them for years. Several key officials submitted resignation letters within hours, while others began cooperating with international investigators. Putin's rage was legendary among those who witnessed it. He ordered the immediate arrest of anyone suspected of disloyalty and implemented martial law in Moscow. The streets filled with military vehicles as a desperate government tried to maintain control through force. But the damage had already been done. The revelations had spread globally within minutes, shared across millions of social media accounts before Russian authorities could implement internet restrictions. Foreign governments were recalling ambassadors, economic partnerships were being terminated, and military alliances were crumbling. Petrov finally tracked Marchenko to an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of Moscow. The facility had been converted into a high-tech operations center, complete with advanced computer systems, drone manufacturing equipment, and communications arrays capable of penetrating any security network. When Petrov's team surrounded the building, they expected to find a small group of desperate fugitives. Instead, they discovered a professional operation staffed by dozens of highly trained individuals who had been preparing for this confrontation for months. The standoff lasted 6 hours. Marchenko, speaking through encrypted radio communications, offered to surrender in exchange for guaranteed safe passage out of Russia and international protection for her team members. Colonel Petrov, her voice crackled through the radio, "We both know this was never about terrorism. This was about truth. Your government has built its power on lies, and those lies needed to be exposed." Petrov found himself in an impossible position. His orders were clear: capture or eliminate the terrorists responsible for the attacks. But the evidence they had revealed was undeniably authentic, and the implications for Russian society were staggering. As he considered his options, Petrov received an encrypted message on his secure phone. The message contained detailed information about his own family's location, his children's school schedules, and his wife's daily routine. The threat was unmistakable. But there was something else in the message that changed everything. Marchenko's team had uncovered evidence that Petrov himself was being set up as a scapegoat for the security failures. Documents showed that higher-ranking officials were prepared to blame him for the breaches and eliminate him to protect their own positions. The realization that his own government was planning to sacrifice him forced Petrov to reconsider everything he thought he knew about loyalty and duty. In the final confrontation, Marchenko revealed the most devastating secret of all. The drone technology used in the attacks had been developed using funds stolen from the Russian military budget by corrupt officials who had intended to sell the technology to foreign governments. "We didn't steal state secrets, Colonel," Marchenko explained as they faced each other in the abandoned facility. "We recovered stolen property and used it to expose the thieves who had betrayed their own country for personal profit." The evidence she presented was overwhelming. Financial records showed millions of rubles diverted from legitimate military research into private accounts. Communication intercepts revealed plans to sell advanced drone technology to hostile nations. Most shocking of all, the trail led directly to several members of Putin's inner circle. Petrov realized that Marchenko and her team were not the real traitors. They were Russian patriots who had been driven to extreme measures by the systematic corruption of the institutions they had once served faithfully. The standoff ended not with gunfire, but with a negotiated agreement. Petrov allowed Marchenko's team to escape in exchange for copies of all the evidence they had gathered about government corruption. The official report would describe a terrorist attack that had been successfully disrupted, with the perpetrators eliminated in the final assault. But the real story would continue to unfold over the following months as the leaked documents slowly made their way to international investigators and opposition groups within Russia. The revelations would ultimately contribute to the largest government shakeup in post-Soviet Russian history. Years later, when historians examined the events that led to the transformation of Russian politics, they would point to the drone strike in Red Square as the moment when decades of accumulated lies and corruption finally began to collapse under their own weight. The attack had lasted only seconds, but its consequences echoed for years. It proved that even the most powerful governments were vulnerable to the truth, and that sometimes the greatest patriots were those brave enough to expose their own country's darkest secrets. Colonel Viktor Petrov quietly retired from the FSB 6 months after the incident. He moved to a small town in the countryside, where he spent his remaining years writing detailed memoirs that would never be published. But those who knew him said he seemed more at peace than he had ever been during his years of service to a system he had finally learned to question. The drone that struck Red Square had been no larger than a briefcase, but it had carried enough truth to shake an empire. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to FictionWire Russia. This is a fictional story created purely for entertainment.